Hello and welcome to another interview for the online summit. And I have with me a trauma therapist and especially knowledgeable about complex trauma and an educator, Roland Bal from rolandbal.com. Here with me. Welcome, Roland.
Thanks for having me, Karsten.
It's wonderful to speak to you in person today for the first time. I've been listening to some of your content, listening to your meditations that you're doing, and you're especially versed with trauma, and I think you're taking people deeper and probably to more healing than a lot of other people might be doing or might be capable of. You seem to have a lot of expertise yourself as well. So maybe we could start this interview by you telling us a bit about your personal story. How did you get into this field of becoming a trauma therapist? And is there, if there's any anecdote or anything you want to tell about your own life, how you get into it, you're welcome to.
Okay, let's start right in the deep then.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think the first word that comes up is escape. That's basically where I started. And in my late teens, I was quite into drug abuse and I had to escape. So that's what I did. I traveled for a few years in Southeast Asia and India, trying to get to grips with some of the past issues I was working through depression and self-esteem issues, and then the traumas that are related to that. So that's where I started. And then as I was traveling, I was young, I was thinking what to do with my life. And then at the same time being interested to heal myself. So I got interested in body work and massage. And then when I came back from my travels, I'm from Holland, Dutch. And I started to look for courses that might assist my personal process. So I started studying craniosacral therapy, then later on visceral manipulation. And I got interested in working with chronic pains, setting up a practice. So I did that for more than 10 years, 10 to 15 years, working with people who suffered from chronic pains. And what I was seeing is that you could do, even if you work on a very subtle level with craniosacral therapy, for example, you work on the subtle energetic level where it touches the physical material level. But what I was still seeing is that as you shift their pain points, as you release the pain, the chronic pains in the body, very often there would be an emotion related to it. So they might be free for a while from that pain, but it just comes back in a different place in the body. So I got more and more interested to really go to the core of the problems, the issues themselves. And then inevitably you have to deal with the emotions because those are often at the core and what stores in the body over time, especially in the fascia and the connective tissues. And so that's how I started to dig deeper into working with emotions and started to follow some trauma therapy approaches like somatic emotional release and somatic experiencing, diving deeper in developmental trauma, working with Lawrence Heller and his ex-wife, Diana Heller. And so bit by bit, I started to kind of put the pieces together of working with the cognitive work of trauma, but then coming from a bodywork background, so already having the somatic integration, the somatic work in my hands, in my system, because I work with bodies for so long. So that's basically how the journey started. And then as I was setting up a website to reach to more people and work online with people, I started to focus first more on PTSD because like 7-8 years ago, that was the word, that was kind of the keyword that people were looking for. But then what happened is that my writings were more attractive to women who had a background of child abuse and childhood trauma and neglect. And so my focus started to go more into working with complex trauma because my approach in my writing and my resources were more geared to these types of people, people dealing with long-standing trauma that usually came through experiences and periods in childhood.
That is wonderful. And I like that you got introduced into the field kind of by working with the body. A lot of people, or a lot of therapists, I guess, are working the other way around. They're kind of coming from a more cognitive place, or, they're trying to help people with everyday problems from a cognitive place at first. And I think recently the connection between body and mind, or body and also the cognitive mind, I guess, is making, or is coming back kind of more strongly, and especially your expertise with working with the body, and how you talked about finding the pain points and releasing them, and then all of a sudden trauma gets released, and psychologically people are in a better place. Their life, they can pick up their life in a different way. Now you mentioned, so yeah, back then PTSD was the big word, but then you shifted into complex trauma. And maybe you can explain a little bit more about what the difference is, and what the difference in working with it would be as well. Because I think from my own experience, as we talked a little bit before this interview, and I explained that I noticed, I found I had my life pretty much put together, only I wasn't so happy, right? So I was quite successful with things, and I was good at what I was doing, but there were these places where I was very unhappy, and seemed to get into the same habits over and over. And then I noticed, oh, there is something that isn't clearly, like, I couldn't pinpoint a trauma, but there must have been something more complex. And maybe that's what you mean, or maybe it's different. Can you explain a little bit?
Yes and no. I'm always a bit careful to make very clear distinctions between diagnosis, because you can get lost in labeling and not look at the issues themselves so much anymore. But I think we all have some form of developmental trauma, which are periods in time where we're exposed to a mother and father figure, and where we develop certain patterns in relationship to those caregivers. And then there's also complex trauma, where the abuse or the neglect is very often more severe. So there's a distinction there already between what we can call developmental trauma and complex trauma, or complex PTSD. And complex PTSD or complex trauma is just, in intensity, is a level more severe, where there's continuous physical, psychological, or sexual abuse present as a toddler, as a youngster, as a teenager. PTSD, what I've often seen, relates to an incidental experience of abuse or neglect. So it could be that you're in an accident, or you're being robbed or mugged, or maybe you've gone through war and you've seen certain things, or you've been molested or raped, an incident, one-off incident, or maybe two or three. But the more trauma accumulates and the more experiences you have over time, then you kind of start to lean more towards complex trauma. And the difficulty with complex trauma, especially when it has started in childhood, is that you get different layers of trauma, one built on top of the other. And that's probably the biggest difference and the biggest complexity that you have to deal with when you start to unravel the trauma, because you're basically opening up a box of Pandora, and you have to carefully open up the things that need to be worked with, but then also start to distinguish between those different levels. And so some of my trauma patterns might relate just to a mother figure. So I might be a pleaser towards my mother on one level, but then towards my father, I might have another traumatic patterns that I've created through time, which might be to more lash out or be aggressive. I'm just taking some examples. So you have to distinguish a little bit to what's at play when you work with somebody, and then kind of work through those different levels.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. And I guess it's the layers that make it also difficult to when you don't have a guide and when you're kind of on your own. It's I mean, we're never on our own. There are always guides, I guess, around us. But when we start kind of opening up that box of Pandora, I think it's very difficult at first. I get that from my own clients when they say, you know, I've been dealing with this for such a long time now. I still don't find kind of, well, I seem to have gotten rid of it, but then it seems to be coming back, or seems to be something else coming up now. And it's kind of an opening that takes a while sometimes to unravel, right? And
well, the thing is that you don't want to see your own things, and that's also where your survival rests on. So your dissociation, even if you don't like it, and dissociation, another word for it might be disconnection or fatigue or depressed. So just to place it a bit better in your understanding or mind, you do that out of survival. You avoid things of yourself where you have blind spots or black spots, because if you actually get in touch with your emotion, you will be overwhelmed again. So that's why it's so difficult to work on yourself, because you're actively avoiding seeing those things in the first place. Seeing the anger that's still stored there, or being connected to the fear and anxiety, or being connected to the overwhelming sadness. You want to avoid that at all costs. And that's the difficulty, that you don't want to see. On one level, you want to work through it because you want to feel better, but on another level, you don't want to see those things because you'd feel really bad. You'd feel overwhelmed again.
Yeah, I think you're saying something really important. On the one hand, life is about feeling those emotions. Without feeling them, there is no, you know, people are striving to feel more connected with their emotions, but on the other hand, they're running away from that. Or that's
absolutely.
We're all doing that to a degree, I guess.
And the thing is that once you start to feel again, the first things that you will feel is the things that don't feel pleasant. And so that's the difficulty when you've been traumatized. The moment you tap into the body, into feeling, then you're going to start to feel the things that aren't pleasant. And you have to be very careful. That's why I set up the trauma care meditations and really outline that you have to be really careful that as you connect with the soma, with the body, you have to titrate that. You have to make it digestible. So you have to really go in and out, and even honor the disconnection and dissociation, that you can consciously go back into your head, which is your safe place, even if it brings some fatigue and disconnection and maybe even some depression. That you can consciously control that moving in and out, and then slowly on you start to digest and integrate the memories, the emotional memories that are held in the body tissues.
I like that, especially about your meditation, your trauma care meditations, where you kind of give permission to be distracted again from, go into the emotions, but then distract yourself. It's okay to distract yourself. It's okay to go away.
I think it's a necessity even. It's a necessity even, because I think the mindset that we're so identified with in the external world is to achieve, to get somewhere, to overcome. And we take that same approach into our psychology of I have to get over this, or if only I didn't do that, or if it would have been different, or kind of beating yourself up to be different and better. And I think it just puts more pressure onto the problem and the issue itself and pushes you into self-defeat. So if you can bring in that gentleness of kind of going step by step, and if you have to take a step backwards, well, take a step backwards. And that itself changes, like it shifts that time element of having to get somewhere and connects you again with what is at this very moment. And it's that non-dualistic approach to me that is so essential to actually integrate or transform or release some of the emotions that we're holding.
Wow. Yeah.
And also memories, when you're dissociated, very often you don't really clearly remember what happened to you or how it happened. But the moment you slowly start to descend from the cognitive into the physical and start to connect with those emotions, the memories also start to come back of what happened to you. And again, you have to put breaks in there too, because you know how memory works. It starts to associate very quick to other memories.
Yeah.
And then the emotion that comes with it starts to overwhelm you. So you kind of have to break the process as well.
Yeah.
And like, okay, let's hold, especially when you work one-on-one, you can do that. Like, okay, hold it for a moment.
Yeah.
What's going on for you right there, right now? What are you feeling? Can you give that some more depth, or can you hold that? Can you feel your feet on the floor, or touch your hands and massage your forearms and see how that feels? So you can kind of bring in little tricks there to help embodiment, to help digesting.
Well, this is really good information. This is wonderful, and I see the overlap with why I'm doing hypnosis. Is also the only reason might be that to actually put breaks in there, to actually slow people down and keep them in a safe space while they're dealing with difficult emotions. So you mentioned, there are so many things. We would probably have to do another interview at another time. I already see so many things opening up. But sticking a little bit with, you mentioned overwhelm happening, and you also are mentioning, you're also offering this little gift. People can sign up to your site, and what you say is meditation is not always the best choice, at least not regular meditation. I think you just explained it. Nevertheless, you are offering meditation or meditations or guided meditations to help people dive into. So when people are feeling overwhelmed, what's a good way to start when they're maybe working with themselves, or and what would be a better choice than regular meditation? I mean, you already said a little bit about it.
Coming back to what I said, I really focus on integrating a cognitive and a somatic approach. So the cognitive approach helps you to map out what happens for you, what happens in your body and in your mind. So basically, what happens when you're overwhelmed, which is when the trauma enters, is that you can't really stay properly in the body. You dissociate from being embodied, and you move that energy into the head. And what happens in the head is that you get excessive thoughts, and they will always go with some form of guilt or blame or shame or self-reproach or self-righteousness or pride. It depends a bit on what kind of trauma you went through, what persons you were exposed to. If you had a mom that always was belittling you, you probably have a lot of self-reproach. I'm not good. I'm never going to be good enough. These kind of thoughts. And if you've been raped or physically abused, sexually abused, you might go into shame, like, oh, I don't feel good about myself, or you feel overly vulnerable all the time. So depending on what you go through, what you've gone through, you move that energy of feeling overwhelmed, where the trauma is, you move that into the head, into some kind of excessive thoughts. Now, when that persists and that gets overwhelming in itself, you move that energy very often into some form of addiction, be it behavioral addiction or be it a substance addiction, or both. It could be excessive mobile watching, could be porn, could be food, could be drugs, could be alcohol, whatever it is, could be excessive yoga even. So it could be anything. And then from that excessive thoughts and addiction, very often when that trauma still keeps ongoing, it perpetuates itself, you move into some form of dissociation or freeze response, disconnection, fatigue, depression, chronic pain. They're all kind of in that realm of dissociation. So just to cut a long story short, you want to make people aware of the cognitive part of how trauma works. And then once you have that framework somewhat in place, you want to take them through the outer layers of the being dissociated, disconnected. You want to move them back in. So through the addiction and through the excessive thoughts, to connect again with where the trauma really is, which is the body. And so that's what I try to do in the trauma care meditation, giving that cognitive information, but then at the same time, putting in guided meditations and interventions to help people connect with the body, with the soma, with the emotional residue that's stored in the body tissues.
Yeah.
And I try to do that in a way that's built up from starting with the head where the dissociation is, and then going through the different parts of the body that relate to the different emotions. So the throat expression, or holding back in, not expressing oneself. Then the chest, which has a lot to do with sadness or loneliness, disconnection, not belonging. Then the solar plexus has a lot to do with self-image, being seen, being able, having a place in the world and not having a place in the world. The liver, other side, liver has a lot to do with anger, frustration, resentment. And then the stomach with digestion, also the emotion, stomach duodenum. And then deeper into the belly, you get into the your foundation, your sexuality, your creativity and reproduction. And so I try to link up the physical with the energetic and the emotional.
Yeah.
And so kind of, and in a bigger realm to connect the cognitive and the somatic all together. So just in a nutshell, what I try to do in the trauma care meditations and my approach in general, also my writing, they're very much focused on integrating all of these things together. And I would even say it's kind of the next step in trauma approach, because as you said, or we mentioned in the beginning, that we came from the Freud and the Jungian. Jungian was quite energetic, working with dreams, but the Freudian approach is very cognitive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then that was the dominant approach for many years. And then in the 70s, that kind of broke up, and you got the kind of the self-help groups and kind of the shouting and the all that kind of the Osho meditations and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And then now I think we come into a space where there's more maturity, where we bring all of that to a deeper level, and really integrating the cognitive and the somatic approach more and more. What I see, not just me, but I see also other people in the field, kind of that consciousness pops up in different areas in the world, you know.
I agree,
and kind of expanding the knowledge and bringing that out.
I see it too, and I'm glad you're mentioning it, because otherwise I'm just thinking maybe it's the Facebook algorithms just shows me the same that I'm studying at the moment. But it seems to be that it's like people are actually integrating more, and therapists, they're more holistic therapists. And as you said, I mean, Jung was already doing this energy work
far beyond this
how long
time
ago, 80 years ago or more. No, more than that now. So, yeah. So, I love the integrative approach, and you offered to, after this interview, you offered to take me through a short process, and the viewers through a short process of how you do the meditations, and that would be wonderful. So, bringing it back to the emotions. You already talked about, okay, so there are layers and there are certain emotions kind of linked to certain body parts a little bit. You mentioned anger, fear, and sadness as the big ones, but also shame and guilt, I think, are particularly important to deal with these days. And I think they're, from my perspective, they seem to be the most complex. I don't know if that's also your impression. And how do you deal with them? How you distinguish them?
Coming back to what I said, I see them as forms of excessive thoughts that are fueled by our core emotions.
Yeah.
So you get on a deeper level, you have the fear, anger, or sadness, and they've been overwhelming to you. So that's where the trauma lies. And then when you can't contain that, that moves from an embodiment into the head, into shame, guilt, blame, shame, or self-reproach, self-righteousness, pride, self-defeat. And there are a few others that I don't remember right now. I think the danger is sometimes that we get too focused on resolving shame or guilt or these excessive thoughts, and kind of forgetting that they're fueled by a deeper place, which is the emotion. And so when I worked with clients, I'm not seeing individual clients at the moment, but what I often said is that, could you just hold yourself with the guilt for a moment and see if you can negate feeding it more energy? Because it kind of it runs away with you. The moment you go into thoughts of guilt, like I'm stupid, I'm not good enough, or shame or self-reproach.
Yeah.
Or if only I would be different. Like, you know, these thoughts that go around in your head.
Sure. Yeah.
And so they go on a roller coaster, they run away with you, and they go in all kinds of directions that kind of remind you of other experiences where you also didn't act the way you should have acted, or you think you. So it kind of builds up through association in your thoughts. It builds up momentum, and then it just kind of goes on and on and on, and it runs away with you.
Yeah.
So rather than letting it go exponentially outward, the idea is if we can take that inward. So we can even start there and do that meditation right away that you mentioned. So if I could invite you to close your eyes, or if that's too overwhelming, look in front of you, look at your legs, or look at the desk, or your hands. And so pick anything that relates to you. Like me, for example, I go into blame. When I get overwhelmed, anger is at the core, and I go into blame. For you, it might be different. It might be shame or guilt or self-reproach. It doesn't really matter which one it is, but if that's very present for you, you can probably catch the feeling of that. It gives busyness and stress in the head, racing thoughts. So I would suggest you to start with the feeling of that, not so much the giving credibility to the thoughts that pop up in your head, but the feeling that goes with it. So if you have some form of shame or guilt, and the thoughts that go with it, oh, I'm not good enough, I should be better, or why did I do this, if only. And there's a certain emotional pain to it. There's the excessive thoughts, but then there's also a sting of pain to it. So I invite you just to stay with that and not allow it to go further into thoughts. And so when you shift, kind of put a break on allowing yourself to roll with the thoughts, but kind of shift to just feeling it, you might suddenly become aware of how much that impacts your head space. It gives busyness, it gives tension, and maybe you frown your forehead till your eyes get a bit more or are a bit tense. And you might already notice that when you negate a bit, just putting more energy into those thought forms, that something shifts. There's a quietening, a slowing down. It doesn't mean that it's suddenly magically going to disappear. It's just you put in the different variable, which is. And so when you bring in that variable, that non-dual approach, you take away the importance that you normally put in those thoughts. You disconnect those associations. And you might also notice that you can take that a bit deeper. You can actually feel the pain that goes just beyond or lies beneath those excessive thoughts. You might suddenly start to feel the body, your breathing is restricted, your throat might be a bit tense. Or you might feel an emotion that's just beneath those excessive thoughts of anger or sadness. Or a memory might suddenly pop up where you see that maybe one of your parents, your mom, your dad, always belittled you, always said to you that you're no good, or you should be this or that. And so the importance is that you see that the thoughts themselves aren't the main thing to change or to be focused on. They're just the result of. They're an expression of the pain that lies beneath, which is held in the body. And the moment you shift away the importance of having to solve your shame or your guilt or having to get rid of it, but seeing that those expressions are a result of having felt overwhelmed, either through an incident or through a period of time, that shifting away your energy and your focus on trying to solve those particular thought forms already diminishes the problem, because then you don't make a problem out of it. And you can actually start to work with the unsaid things and the energy that comes with it that you have towards your mom or your dad or the person who abused you or your teacher. So you shift away the problem by dissolving the problem. So just that was a little introduction to meditation.
Okay. Thank you, Roland. That was very, very wonderful. It was, if I may just recount my and for the viewers, this is just what I experienced, but so it might be different for others, but maybe some people can connect to that. So I had a situation in mind that, which is, I feel like I don't have, or I felt I was powerless kind of to change it, and then I had this kind of really stinging in the chest, or pain in the chest, and then when I allowed the thoughts to go and just really focus on that, I noticed it was probably sadness. Maybe there was something else too, but it was sadness that felt. And when you said allow, I really could allow myself to just feel that. And already, as you said, there wasn't, it was like, oh, okay, so the whole thing my mind was doing wasn't actually the problem. That's really,
that's the interesting thing. Yeah.
That's just little chatter, but that's not really that important anymore. What's important was what's going on right now, and I don't even have to resolve it fully right now, but it kind of relaxed my whole body. And well, there was a pain, but I wasn't suffering from it anymore. I was just kind of acknowledging it at the moment, and that started to resolve a little bit. It started to become more benign, I guess, and a different type of thinking that it kind of emerged from that. Wasn't as cognitive.
That's the interesting thing when you are aware cognitively of those levels and then also somatically start to move through it and work through it. You see that what you've put a lot of focus on, and then when you shift the focus, the problem also dissolves.
Yeah.
And so you might be focused on overcoming an addiction, and it is problematic in itself because it gives issues in your day-to-day life living.
Yeah.
But when you become aware that the addiction is a result of, it's an outcome of feeling overwhelmed, and that's a way of trying to survive, of trying to mitigate the excess stress you have in the body. Once you understand that, you don't focus that much on addiction anymore. And the same is true for excessive thoughts. What we just addressed is that when you see that excessive thoughts are a result of having too much emotional residue that's active in your body, the moment you understand that and actually feel through it, you shift a level deeper and you can start to work with that. Of course, you'll still go up and down between those levels.
Yeah.
It's not like, especially in those 10 minutes that we did, it's not like a fairy tale thing that everything is gone, but
It's resolved. No.
Because it'll take time, especially with complex trauma. You'll need patience and persistence to work through that. But already having the knowledge and having the framework to work through it gives that kind of space of being able to breathe. Okay, I finally understand what's happening to me. I'm not crazy. I'm not stupid.
Yeah. That's, I think, very comforting and helpful for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you so much for that. So people, if they want to learn more about you, they can reach you at, I guess, rolandbal.com.
On the main website, just get into the main homepage, and from there you'll find everything about me. There's some sign-up forms as well where people can get some freebies, some online free courses, and then there's of course the trauma care meditations. Also 6 ebooks are in there with all my resources. So people can go there.
Wonderful. And of course, we'll put a link where you offer it, where people can sign up to get in touch with you. And
appreciate it.
That's wonderful. Is there anything else that we haven't, or any message you want to give out to people, maybe especially during these times, or just in general?
Be kind to yourself. Take it one step at a time. Patience and persistence, that's the kind of key. So
patience and persistence,
absolutely.
Key, I think so. I fully agree with that, and be kind, because also in everyday life, when you do these meditations, you kind of get a feel for what's possible, and you slow things down, and then everyday life, things get hectic sometimes, or they get more, we get overwhelmed by situations, and then being kind to ourselves, I think, is very important, and say, well, this takes practice, and it takes patience.
It takes dedication.
Dedication.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for having me.
It was wonderful to talk to you, and I wish we could redo this another time, or maybe do an add-on interview at some point.
Sure. Sounds good.
It was really, really good to talk to you. You're a very kind person and very knowledgeable, not just knowledgeable cognitively, but I think the experience you have really shows. And I do recommend people, especially with more complex traumas, to check out your website and check out your work. And
excellent.
It's really wonderful, Roland. Okay, so thank you very much, and hope to see you again soon.
Most welcome.